As soon as the priest's feet touched the waters, they miraculously parted, allowing all of Israel to cross on dry ground, just as it had happened years before at the Red Sea. This miracle confirmed Joshua's authority before the people, showing that just as God had been with Moses, he would also be with him, guiding every step toward the fulfillment of his promises. The crossing of the Jordan symbolized a new phase in Israel's journey, marking the transition from a wandering people to a conquering nation. For many, it was the first time witnessing such a powerful display of God's power, as the previous generation had perished in the wilderness due to unbelief. Joshua understood the importance of this moment and instructed that 12 stones be taken from the riverbed and set up as a memorial in Gilgal, ensuring that future generations would never forget what God had done for them. This act was not just a symbol, but a teaching tool, reminding each Israelite that their journey depended on divine faithfulness and continuous obedience. The crossing of the Jordan was also a moment of spiritual renewal for the people, called to fully trust in God and follow his commands without hesitation. Thus, entering the Promised Land was not merely a territorial matter, but an affirmation of the covenant established with the Lord. However, this crossing also brought challenges. Canaan was not an empty land, but inhabited by powerful nations and fortified cities. Joshua knew that every step from that point forward would require faith, courage, and total dependence on God. The crossing of the Jordan was just the first step toward conquest, and every future victory would depend on absolute obedience to divine decrees. The people, who had so often murmured in the wilderness, were now challenged to walk in total trust, believing that the God who dried up the river would also bring down the walls of their enemies. This event made it clear that without God's presence, conquest would be impossible. Therefore, Joshua reinforced the need for consecration and faithfulness, teaching that Israel's true strength lay not in their weapons or strategies, but in the Lord's presence going before them. The crossing of the Jordan remains a powerful lesson for today. Just as Israel faced seemingly insurmountable barriers, we all encounter obstacles that seem impossible to overcome. However, Joshua's story teaches us that when we trust in God and follow his instructions, miracles happen and paths open where none seemed possible. The crossing represents the transition from doubt to faith, from hesitation to courage, and from fear to unwavering trust. God not only parted the Jordan, but also led his people to a new beginning, full of challenges, yet filled with fulfilled promises. Joshua and the people understood that the same God who opened the way in the wilderness would also open the doors of victory if they remained faithful to his word. The conquest of Jericho is one of the most emblematic episodes of Joshua's leadership and Israel's history, demonstrating that victory does not depend on military strength, but on obedience and faith in God. Jericho was a heavily fortified city, with imposing walls that seemed impenetrable to human eyes. However, Joshua knew that the key to victory lay in total submission to God's instructions. The Lord revealed an unusual plan. The people were to march around the city once a day for 6 days, and on the 7th day they were to circle it 7 times, blow their trumpets, and shout with all their might. From a military perspective, the strategy seemed illogical, but Joshua did not hesitate. He instructed the people to follow every detail of the plan, understanding that obedience was the key to the manifestation of God's power. Each day of silent marching tested the Israelites' faith as the city remained intact, yet Joshua's trust in the divine promise did not waver. On the 7th day, as the Lord commanded, the Israelites marched around the city 7 times, and at the sound of the trumpets they gave a mighty shout of war. Then the impossible happened. Jericho's walls collapsed completely, delivering the city into the hands of God's people. This extraordinary event demonstrated that the true battle was not won with swords and spears, but with faith and submission to God's will. Jericho, a symbol of human strength and resistance, fell without a single stone being removed by human hands, proving that God fights the battles of his people when they choose to trust in him. The destruction of Jericho also served as a sign to the other nations of Canaan, showing them that Israel did not rely solely on military skills, but on the Almighty God. The victory over Jericho was not just a territorial conquest, but a confirmation of God's faithfulness to his promise to give the land to Abraham's descendants. The conquest of Jericho is one of the most emblematic episodes of Joshua's leadership and Israel's history, demonstrating that victory does not depend on military strength, but on obedience and faith in God. Jericho was a heavily fortified city, with imposing walls that seemed impenetrable to human eyes. However, Joshua knew that the key to victory lay in total submission to God's instructions. The Lord revealed an unusual plan. The people were to march around the city once a day for 6 days, and on the 7th day they were to circle it 7 times, blow their trumpets, and shout with all their might. From a military perspective, the strategy seemed illogical, but Joshua did not hesitate. He instructed the people to follow every detail of the plan, understanding that obedience was the key to the manifestation of God's power. Each day of silent marching tested the Israelites' faith as the city remained intact, yet Joshua's trust in the divine promise did not waver. On the 7th day, as the Lord commanded, the Israelites marched around the city 7 times, and at the sound of the trumpets, they gave a mighty shout of war. Then the impossible happened. Jericho's walls collapsed completely, delivering the city into the hands of God's people. This extraordinary event demonstrated that the true battle was not won with swords and spears, but with faith and submission to God's will. Jericho, a symbol of human strength and resistance, fell without a single stone being removed by human hands, proving that God fights the battles of his people when they choose to trust in him. The destruction of Jericho also served as a sign to the other nations of Canaan, showing them that Israel did not rely solely on military skills, but on the Almighty God. The victory over Jericho was not just a territorial conquest, but a confirmation of God's faithfulness to his promise to give the land to Abraham's descendants. However, the conquest of Jericho also brought important lessons about absolute obedience and the holiness required by God. Joshua had commanded that nothing from the city be taken, as everything was to be dedicated to the Lord as the first fruits of the conquest. However, Achan, one of the Israelites, disobeyed this command and took forbidden items, hiding them in his tent. This act of disobedience brought severe consequences upon the people of Israel, resulting in a humiliating defeat at Ai, a city that should have been easily conquered. The lesson learned was clear. Even in the face of great victories, faithfulness to God and unwavering obedience are fundamental for continued success. Joshua, upon discovering the sin, dealt with it rigorously, showing that there was no room for disobedience in God's mission. The episode of Jericho not only strengthened the people's confidence in God, but also taught them that holiness and righteousness were non-negotiable for those who wanted to live in God's promises. The story of Jericho's fall continues to inspire generations, showing that life's greatest barriers are not removed by human strength, but by divine intervention when there is faith and obedience. Just as Joshua trusted in God's plan, we are challenged to follow the Lord's directions, even when they seem contrary to human logic. Jericho represents the seemingly insurmountable challenges we face, and the collapse of its walls reminds us that God is faithful to fulfill his promises when we follow his instructions with patience and trust. The conquest of Jericho was not just a military victory, but a landmark in the history of faith, proving that dependence on God is the true path to achieving the impossible. After the impressive victory at Jericho, the people of Israel faced an unexpected challenge in the city of Ai, a defeat that exposed the importance of absolute obedience to God's commands. It was a smaller city, seemingly less fortified than Jericho, leading the Israelites to underestimate the need to seek the Lord's guidance before advancing. Confident in their recent success, Joshua sent only a small force to capture the city, believing the victory would be easy. However, the unexpected happened. The Israelites were defeated and fled before the inhabitants of Ai, suffering humiliating losses. This sudden failure caused distress and discouragement among the people, prompting Joshua to cry out to God, questioning why the defeat had occurred. The Lord then revealed to Joshua that the problem was not in the strength of the army or military strategy, but in hidden sin within the camp. Someone had disobeyed God's orders in Jericho, bringing consequences upon the entire people. The investigation revealed that Achan, an Israelite from the tribe of Judah, had taken forbidden items, silver, gold, and a Babylonian garment, and hidden them in his tent. This act of disobedience not only violated God's clear command, but also brought judgment upon the entire nation. After regaining confidence and achieving victory at Ai, Joshua and the people of Israel faced an even greater challenge: the conquest of the entire land of Canaan, filled with fortified cities and powerful kings. News of Israel's miraculous victories had already spread throughout the region, instilling fear and prompting the Canaanite kings to unite against them. However, Joshua was not intimidated. Under divine guidance, he led the Israelite army through a series of strategic battles that demonstrated not only his military prowess, but also God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises. The first major coalition against Israel occurred in southern Canaan, when 5 Amorite kings joined forces to resist Joshua. In response, the Lord assured victory to his people by sending a hailstorm upon their enemies, and even extending the daylight to allow Israel to complete the battle. Joshua's famous prayer for the sun and moon to stand still revealed God's power, working in favor of his people, proving that continuous obedience yielded supernatural results. As they advanced, Joshua led the Israelites in battles against powerful kingdoms such as Hazor, Makkedah, and Libnah, capturing strategic territories and demolishing enemy fortresses. Each victory was marked by unwavering obedience to God's commands, who instructed Joshua not to fear but to press forward with courage. The key difference between Israel and other nations was not their military strength, but the presence of God leading their battles. Joshua's trust in divine guidance allowed the Israelites to bring down cities that seemed impenetrable and defeat armies that were, humanly speaking, far superior. Joshua's military campaign was long and demanding, but their faithfulness to God ensured success in every confrontation. The secret to their victories was not in the strength of their weapons, but in submission to the divine plan, which involved consecration, strategy, and unshakable faith. Despite their conquests, Joshua faced internal challenges among the people, as some tribes hesitated to completely drive out the Canaanite inhabitants, allowing their corrupting influences to remain. Joshua continuously exhorted the people not to compromise the sanctity of their mission. He understood that the military victories would only have lasting value if the people remained faithful to the covenant with the Lord. Every city conquered was more than just a territorial gain. It was proof that God was fulfilling his promise to Abraham. However, the lingering presence of pagan peoples among the Israelites would later become a source of trouble, leading them to idolatry and turning away from God's path. Joshua's conquest of Canaan teaches us that true victory only comes through complete dependence on God. Each battle mirrors the spiritual struggles believers face today, where obedience to God's word remains the key to overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Joshua's story challenges us to trust that when God makes a promise, He is faithful to fulfill it, even in the face of the greatest adversities. The victories over the kings of Canaan were not just the result of human effort, but of Joshua's commitment to follow God's commands without question. Just as Israel had to fight to take possession of the land, we are called to fight spiritually, to claim God's promises in our lives, trusting that He will grant us victory when we walk in faith and obedience. With the major military victories secured and most of Canaan under Israelite control, Joshua faced a new and crucial task: dividing the land among the 12 tribes of Israel. This moment was more than just a territorial distribution. It was the fulfillment of the promise God had made to Abraham centuries earlier. Each tribe was to receive a specific portion of the land according to divine instructions, ensuring that every family had a place to settle, prosper, and serve the Lord. Joshua, as a wise and just leader, handled this process with great dedication and respect for God's commands. He began by establishing the tribal boundaries based on the inheritance allocated by Moses, ensuring that the division was fair and equitable. The tribe of Levi, however, did not receive a portion of land since their role was to serve in the priesthood and care for sacred matters, receiving cities scattered among the other tribes instead. The division of the land was not merely an administrative task, but a constant reminder that each portion ultimately belonged to the Lord and was to be used for His glory. The division process revealed internal challenges among the tribes, as some expressed dissatisfaction with their allotted portions, claiming they needed more space due to their growing population. Joshua, with his firm leadership, reminded the people that their possession of the land did not depend solely on the quantity of territory, but on their willingness to trust God and work diligently to cultivate and protect what had been given to them. Tribes such as Ephraim and Manasseh requested larger portions, and Joshua challenged them to conquer additional lands through faith and effort, rather than relying on easy handouts. This episode demonstrated that even after great victories, the human heart still needed to be shaped to depend on God and trust His plans. The land distribution also reinforced the importance of unity among the tribes, for although each had their individual inheritance, they all shared the same purpose: to live according to God's commandments and be a holy nation. In addition to ensuring the fair division of the land, Joshua established cities of refuge and Levitical cities as commanded by God. The cities of refuge served as safe havens for those who unintentionally caused a person's death, providing them with fair trials and protection from revenge. This system reflected God's justice and mercy, ensuring that Israel would be governed by divine principles rather than human vengeance. The Levitical cities, on the other hand, were established to house the priests and Levites, ensuring that God's law was accessible throughout all regions of Israel. This organizational structure demonstrated Joshua's concern for maintaining the spiritual identity of the people even after conquest, recognizing that Israel's true prosperity did not depend solely on possessing land, but on their faithfulness to the Lord. The division of the land marked the end of an era of wandering and the beginning of a new phase of stability and growth for Israel. Joshua, now advanced in age, completed his mission with a profound sense of accomplishment, urging the people to remain faithful to God's covenant. He knew that the true possession of the land was not just about physical occupation, but about obedience to divine commandments. The story of the land division teaches us that God's blessings often come with responsibilities, requiring wisdom, diligence, and above all, faithfulness. Just as Israel had to learn to manage their inheritance, we are also called to steward the gifts and promises that God entrusts to us, always remembering that everything belongs to Him and should be used for His glory. In the final days of his life, Joshua understood the importance of reaffirming the covenant between the people of Israel and God, ensuring that future generations would remain faithful to the pact established at Mount Sinai. After years of battles and conquests, there was a risk that the people might become complacent and stray from the path, forgetting that the true possession of the promised land depended on their continuous obedience to the Lord. Therefore, Joshua summoned all the tribes of Israel to gather at Shechem, a place of profound historical significance where Abraham had first received God's promises and where Joshua himself had previously renewed the covenant. Before the elders, leaders, and the entire assembly, Joshua recounted Israel's journey from their exodus from Egypt to their victories in Canaan, highlighting God's unwavering faithfulness and the countless times He had rescued them from seemingly impossible situations. This solemn speech was not just a historical reflection, but a call to faithfulness and a conscious decision to serve God with integrity and sincerity. With the authority of a leader who had walked in full obedience to God, Joshua challenged the people with a crucial decision: to remain faithful to the Lord or to follow the pagan gods of the neighboring nations. He declared one of the most well-known statements in the Bible: "Choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Joshua 24:15. These words echoed in the hearts of the Israelites, challenging them to abandon any traces of idolatry and fully commit to the God who had delivered them from slavery and given them the promised land. The people enthusiastically declared their loyalty to the Lord, but Joshua, aware of human inconsistency, sternly warned them about the seriousness of such a commitment. He reminded them that God is holy and jealous, and that unfaithfulness would bring severe consequences, just as it had for previous generations who had perished in the wilderness. Joshua wanted to ensure that this covenant renewal was more than just words spoken in the heat of the moment. He desired it to be a decision deeply rooted in genuine conviction and long-term commitment. To seal the covenant renewal, Joshua established a memorial as a witness to the commitment made that day. From his youth, Joshua demonstrated an exceptional dedication to the mission that God had prepared for him. As a faithful assistant to Moses, he not only witnessed the great works of the Lord in Egypt and the wilderness, but also stood out for his courage and unwavering obedience. While the people frequently wavered in their faith, Joshua remained steadfast, trusting in divine guidance. His first major test of loyalty came when he was sent as one of the 12 spies to explore the land of Canaan. While 10 of the spies brought back terrifying reports about the giants and the difficulties they would face, Joshua and Caleb clung to God's promise, boldly declaring that with God, Israel could take possession of the promised land. This unwavering trust in God distinguished him as a man of vision and faith, qualities that would be essential when the time came for him to lead the people. However, stepping into leadership after Moses was a monumental challenge. Joshua had to prove his ability not only as a warrior but also as a spiritual guide, capable of keeping the people united and focused on fulfilling God's promises. The transition was marked by the reaffirmation of God's covenant, and Joshua demonstrated that he was ready for the divine calling, willing to obey every command of the Lord without hesitation. Upon assuming leadership, Joshua faced a people shaped by years of wandering in the wilderness, marked by trials, complaints, and tests of faith. They had witnessed extraordinary miracles, such as the parting of the Red Sea and manna falling from heaven, yet they still struggled with belief. The new leader needed to anchor them in total trust in God and unwavering obedience to the covenant made at Sinai. To accomplish this, Joshua constantly reminded the people of God's words, exhorting them to be strong in the divine law. Leading Israel was not merely a matter of military strategy, but also a spiritual battle, requiring discernment and sensitivity to divine instructions. Joshua understood that his mission was not based on his own strength or experience, but on obedience and trust in God's sovereignty. The Lord assured him that the land would be conquered, but success depended on faithfully following divine directions. Therefore, Joshua cultivated a life of prayer and deep communion with God, seeking guidance at every step. His posture of dependence and obedience made him a living example of servant leadership, always placing God's interests above his own. Joshua's appointment as Israel's leader was no accident, but a divine choice rooted in his unwavering faithfulness and commitment. Throughout the long journey in the wilderness, he learned valuable lessons about patience, perseverance, and trust in God. He saw how disobedience led to painful consequences, as happened with the generation that perished in the wilderness due to their rebellion. These experiences shaped Joshua's character, preparing him for the challenges ahead. As a leader, he not only inspired by example, but also stood firmly in the face of adversity, correcting the people when necessary and encouraging them to remain faithful to the covenant. Joshua's calling also required courage to face powerful enemies, unknown lands, and immense logistical challenges. However, his heart was anchored in the certainty that the same God who parted the Red Sea would also open the way for the conquest of the Promised Land. Joshua knew that his leadership was not based on his own abilities, but on the constant presence of the Lord by his side. Joshua's story teaches us that true leadership is based on faith, obedience, and humility before God. He faced enormous challenges, from the resistance of his own people to battles against fortified cities and powerful armies. Yet with every challenge, he chose to trust the Lord and follow his instructions without hesitation. His journey is a powerful testimony of how God honors those who follow him wholeheartedly. Today, his example continues to inspire all those facing seemingly impossible challenges. Just like Joshua, we are called to trust in God, obey his word, and persevere in faith, knowing that he is faithful to fulfill all his promises. After assuming leadership, Joshua faced one of the first great challenges on the journey to the Promised Land, crossing the Jordan River. This event was not merely a logistical challenge, but a test of faith for both Joshua and the entire nation. The Jordan, in its seasonal flood, represented an insurmountable barrier to human eyes, but for God, it was another opportunity to demonstrate his power and faithfulness. The Lord instructed Joshua to have the priests carry the Ark of the Covenant and step into the river, trusting that the waters would halt before them. With unwavering faith, Joshua followed the divine instructions and encouraged the people to sanctify themselves, for something great was about to happen. He recorded the words of the covenant in the book of the law of God and set up a large stone at Shechem, saying, "This stone will be a witness against us, for it has heard all the words the Lord has spoken to us." Joshua 24:27. This act symbolized Israel's collective responsibility to uphold God's statutes and pass them on to future generations. Joshua understood that without a constant visual and written reminder, the people could easily drift away and seek other gods, as they had done in the past. The renewal of the covenant was not just a religious formality, but a renewal of the people's hearts and minds, directing them toward a life of service and faithfulness. Thus each tribe returned to their allotted lands with the solemn responsibility to live according to God's commandments, fully aware that Israel's future depended on their faithfulness. The renewal of the covenant teaches us that our relationship with God must be continually reaffirmed and cultivated. Just as Israel faced challenges and temptations that could lead them away from their purpose, we too need to renew our commitment to the Lord, remembering His promises and remaining steadfast in faith. Joshua's story challenges us to make daily decisions of faithfulness, choosing to serve God in all areas of our lives. His example of leadership, grounded in obedience and integrity, continues to serve as a powerful call to remain firm in the Lord's ways, regardless of the pressures of the world around us. Joshua ended his journey with an unwavering legacy of faith, showing that true victory is not just about conquering territories, but about keeping a heart faithful to God until the end. Joshua's story is a powerful testimony of faith, courage, and obedience that continues to inspire generations. His journey teaches us that true leadership is not based solely on strength or skill, but on total dependence on God and a willingness to follow His directions with unwavering faithfulness. From crossing the Jordan River to conquering fortified cities in Canaan, Joshua demonstrated that victory does not come through human strategies, but through submission to divine will. Each step taken by him and the people of Israel was a reflection of God's promises being fulfilled, showing that when we obey His word, He is faithful to lead us to victory. Joshua not only led physical battles, but also faced spiritual challenges, teaching the people that holiness and obedience were essential to maintaining God's blessing upon their lives. His story reminds us that the Christian life is a journey of ongoing trust and faithfulness. One of the most striking aspects of Joshua's life was his ability to face challenges with humility and absolute trust in the Lord. Even after the defeat at Ai, caused by Achan's sin, Joshua did not allow himself to be overcome by discouragement, but instead sought divine guidance and corrected what was necessary to move forward. This episode teaches us that even in the face of failures, it is possible to start anew when there is sincere repentance and a return to obedience to God. Joshua understood that true success is not defined by the absence of difficulties, but by how we respond to them, always seeking the right direction in God. His example encourages us to keep our faith firm, even when facing seemingly insurmountable obstacles, because we know that the Lord is capable of transforming any situation to fulfill His purpose in our lives. Another great legacy of Joshua was his concern for the continued faithfulness of the people to God. By dividing the land among the tribes of Israel, he not only fulfilled the promise made to Abraham, but also established an organized system to ensure the nation's spiritual well-being. Joshua knew that the true inheritance was not just in the conquered lands, but in the continuous relationship with the Lord. He warned the people about the dangers of idolatry and the influence of the surrounding pagan nations, urging them to live in obedience to divine commandments. His final speech, renewing the covenant with God, was a demonstration of his commitment to ensuring that Israel remained on the right path, understanding that true security and prosperity would come only through faithfulness to the Lord. The defeat at Ai showed that holiness and obedience were more important than any military strategy or numerical strength. Joshua, upon discovering the sin, dealt with it seriously, ordering that Achan and all that belonged to him be destroyed, to remove the contamination from among the people. This episode served as a crucial lesson for Israel. No matter how great the previous victory, unconfessed sin would always bring disastrous consequences. The lesson learned at Ai would resonate throughout Israel's history, showing that faithfulness to God is the true foundation for lasting success. After addressing Achan's sin and purifying the camp, God gave Joshua new instructions to attack, this time with a completely different strategy. Instead of relying on human strength, Joshua sought divine guidance and followed a plan designed by God himself. The Israelites used an ambush tactic, pretending to retreat to lure the men of Ai out of the city, allowing another force to enter and capture the city by surprise. The victory was complete and decisive, restoring the people's confidence in God and in their leadership. This experience taught the Israelites that true victory is only possible when there is total alignment with God's purposes and principles. Thus, the story of Ai was not just a defeat, but a powerful reminder that without God, any human endeavor is doomed to fail. The defeat at Ai teaches us a timeless truth. We cannot move forward without God's guidance and presence. Often, initial success can lead us to a state of self-sufficiency where we forget to seek the Lord's direction. However, God allows failures to remind us that we are entirely dependent on Him. Joshua's story and the defeat at Ai reveal that humility, obedience, and holiness are essential elements for a victorious journey. Just as Israel had to deal with the sin in their midst before moving forward, we too must be vigilant about the hidden areas in our lives that may be hindering God's blessings. Restoration and victory come only when we acknowledge our faults and fully submit to God's will. After regaining confidence and achieving victory at Ai, Joshua and the people of Israel faced an even greater challenge, the conquest of the entire land of Canaan, filled with fortified cities and powerful kings. News of Israel's miraculous victories had already spread throughout the region, instilling fear and prompting the Canaanite kings to unite against them. However, Joshua was not intimidated. Under divine guidance, he led the Israelite army through a series of strategic battles that demonstrated not only his military prowess, but also God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises. The first major coalition against Israel occurred in southern Canaan when 5 Amorite kings joined forces to resist Joshua. In response, the Lord assured victory to his people by sending a hailstorm upon their enemies and even extending the daylight to allow Israel to complete the battle. Joshua's famous prayer for the sun and moon to stand still revealed God's power working in favor of his people, proving that continuous obedience yielded supernatural results. As they advanced, Joshua led the Israelites in battles against powerful kingdoms such as Hazor, Makkedah, and Libnah, capturing strategic territories and demolishing enemy fortresses. Each victory was marked by unwavering obedience to God's commands, who instructed Joshua not to fear, but to press forward with courage. The key difference between Israel and other nations was not their military strength, but the presence of God, leading their battles. Joshua's trust in divine guidance allowed the Israelites to bring down cities that seemed impenetrable and defeat armies that were, humanly speaking, far superior. Joshua's military campaign was long and demanding, but their faithfulness to God ensured success in every confrontation. The secret to their victories was not in the strength of their weapons, but in submission to the divine plan, which involved consecration, strategy, and unshakable faith. Despite their conquests, Joshua faced internal challenges among the people, as some tribes hesitated to completely drive out the Canaanite inhabitants, allowing their corrupting influences to remain. Joshua continuously exhorted the people not to compromise the sanctity of their mission. He understood that the military victories would only have lasting value if the people remained faithful to the covenant with the Lord. Every city conquered was more than just a territorial gain. It was proof that God was fulfilling his promise to Abraham. However, the lingering presence of pagan peoples among the Israelites would later become a source of trouble, leading them to idolatry and turning away from God's path. Joshua's life challenges us to reflect on our own spiritual journey. Just as he was called to conquer the promised land, we are also called to fight the battles of faith, trusting that God is with us every step of the way. Joshua teaches us that obedience to God brings lasting rewards, and that even in the most difficult challenges, we must choose to trust in Him. His famous declaration, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord," continues to resonate as a call for all who desire to live a life of faithfulness and commitment to God. May His story inspire us to remain steadfast in our faith, facing each challenge with courage and living in full obedience, knowing that God is faithful to fulfill His promises in our lives.